everyone. My name is Fahan, and you're listening to the Nisa Invest Tea Talk podcast. Hope everybody's feeling good, ready to start your Friday. Alhamdulillah, it's Jummah today. And we're here to recreate in podcast form what happened earlier this year at my local mosque sister circle, where a group of us got together and I was able to host a session talking all things halal personal finance. Whether it had to do with budgeting, pensions, halal investments, we covered all of it. And at the end of the session, I asked my sisters to leave me with the questions that they had in their minds so that I could carry on the conversation with you in podcast form. So thanks so much for being here, and let's get started. And so in today's episode, we're going to start with the first question, which I love, and that I'm going to read it out now. So question number 1, how to actually invest, where to start. So I'll hide the sister's name, but this is the question that has been asked us. Now, we can get into this and let's effectively get to the punchline straight away. So how do you actually invest? Meaning, how is it that I could sit at my computer and by the end of doing whatever it was that I did, I actually can say that I've invested? Now, in the UK, they're pretty much I would say that investing differs slightly depending on where it is that you live. But I'm going to give you an example of how I do it living in the UK. Now, in answering the question how you do it, there are really only 3 small considerations. Of course, if you wanted to know when you're ready to invest, there are some other things you have to think about. And also the big question, why do you want to invest in the first place? And also the question of where is it that you can invest, if what counts as a halal investment or not. But let's answer my friend's question here, how to actually invest and where is it that you start. So the first part of it, how to actually invest, I said there were 3 things you had to consider. So the first one is investing when you're first new to it. Even if you're incredibly new to it, you kind of know that investing will allow your money to grow. And if you invest in such a way that it's halal, all of that money hasn't come from riba, which is interest earned on giving someone a loan. Instead, we're talking about investments that are asset ownership, where you invest in a company or you invest in different types of other asset classes, which is the type of investment, and you do it in such a way that the gains that you get, the terminology for it is capital gains. So that means or dividend income as well, because it comes from you having earned some type of benefit from the fact that you owned something rather than you gave out a loan. So all of these are the types of investments that we're talking about, and a very common form of ownership of something, of an investment, is stocks and shares. So if the question is how to actually invest, let's turn it slightly and say how to actually invest in stocks and shares or any other asset class. Where is it that we can find them? Now in the UK, there are, I like to think of investment products as effectively being like consumer products, and it's a service that you're able to access. So you want to, of course, go to the place that is selling the things that you want to buy. So it has halal investment options for you. Number two, it's easy to use, and like the user interface is, the website kind of looks okay, and it's easy to navigate through it. And number three, it gets the job done, meaning that you're actually able to invest. Now, the providers, in common providers, I every year you're able to open a type of investment account called an ISA. So that still gets to the question of how to actually invest. You do so by opening an ISA. Now, the reason why we want to do that is, how do you actually invest? You have to make sure that the gains that you earn from your investments are not subject to tax. Because, of course, this type of investment, if you earn a return from it, you're subject to what's called capital gains tax or dividend income tax. And so when you ask yourself, how do I actually invest? You have to make sure the first investment that you open is tax advantaged, which means you're able to kind of wrap your investments such that they're not subject to the types of tax that I mentioned. And the ISA is called an individual savings account. That's what it stands for, ISA. And everyone in the UK is eligible to opening an ISA, and every year they're able to invest £20,000 into it. So that's the place to start. Of course, if you have more than 20,000 in a single year, that is amount that you can invest, you would open maybe a second type of account, and that wouldn't be in the ISA wrapper, so it wouldn't be, it would start to be subject to tax. So when I say to you, where do you want to, if you say to me, where do I start investing, I want to make sure that the first one that I open is an ISA. And when you open up your ISA and you put money in, you're effectively ready to invest, and that's when you pick a fund to put your money into. And the fund that you would pick, you just make sure that it is a halal investment option. And we can get into this, even if, for example, I was giving this advice to just someone random in the street, or recommendation, and they didn't have any halal investment considerations. What I would say to them is invest in a broad market index. So that's something like the S&P 500, which is a market index for the US, for the American market. Now, these types of index funds, the reason why maybe even though that would technically be the end of the story, you would just put your money there, but we know that some of the largest companies in the world that might be represented inside this index fund are not companies that we would want to invest in as Muslims, because maybe they are large breweries or something of the sort, where of course it would be counterintuitive to want to own a piece of a brewery, right? So that's why we wouldn't do that. But investing in index funds is a sensible thing to do, because you are just investing in the whole market. You're not there looking for a huge return. You're just there trying to make sure that your money is protected from inflation, and that it will grow over time, and that will compound over time as the gains that you make, which are capital gains, so they're not based on interest, they themselves can grow. And in the simplest way as an investment works, for example, if I believe that the economy is going to grow companies like Apple will go from where they were 20 years from now to now. And we know that that type of, let's say, value creation exists. We want to be in the market, and we want to stay in the market and put money aside regularly, and call ourselves investors. Now, there are index funds available that are effectively halal in the sense that they strip out there are versions of the index that do not include those companies that you wouldn't want to own. And so the second point, aside from knowing that what you want to be opening is an ISA, and the types of providers that the types of providers that are available for you there are like several, and every year you can open a different one if you can test them out. That's kind of what I've done. I've tried out about four different ISAs, and I like Hargreaves Lansdown. AJ Bell is also good, and they both have halal investment options in there. And so if I open my ISA in any of those any of those platforms, I can then choose an index fund that is a halal index fund, and that would be how to actually invest and where to start. I would make sure that the account that I'm opening is an ISA, meaning that is tax advantaged. If you're listening to this and you're in another country, for example, in the US, there are different types of tax advantaged investment accounts. For example, a 401k, and then the Roth IRA, and different types of IRAs whether there are different types of them, even if you're self-employed, that kind of stuff. And in the UK, we have something similar, and that's the stocks and shares ISA. You can open ISAs for your children. You can also open ISAs for those specifically to raise to put money aside to buy a house. But the very simplest kind is the stocks and shares ISA. So that was the response to the first question. The second half of this podcast, we will go through a second question, which was, I would say, not as popular as I thought it was going to be. As I said, I have about, I would say, 40 or so pieces of cards here. Just a few of them raise this topic, and I'll read it out now. It's written in blue. It says, creating a plan on paying off student finance. Now, there is nothing I don't like about this question. Even the way that it's formulated makes me understand. It's like really up my street, if I could say that. So why is it that I love the way this sister has asked this question? Is because already she's saying she wants to create a plan. And that's pretty much giving the answer in the question itself, because that's how it is that we tackle topics such as debt, or even our finances in general. If you have a plan, that's effectively all you need. Having a plan is key when we're talking about things that don't really happen overnight. And student finance is really interesting because I think, unfortunately, it's been highly politicized. It's such a and whenever it's really political, it's kind of makes things worse because we're not able to look at things. It's difficult to know what is or what isn't in your best interest. And sometimes you don't even know how it is that you're supposed to tackle these things. So if we're talking about student finance, which effectively means student loans in the UK, it's incredibly new topic. I started my university education just over a decade ago, and I think we're now entering the second generation of students whose parents took out student loans. That's incredibly rare in the history of the UK, and so the advent of paying off your student loans or knowing what to do with them, unfortunately, there's a lot of mixed messages, and the one that I heard that night with the sisters is the idea that after 30 years, your student loan gets written off. Or the other thing that you hear is if you wanted to go buy a house and you have this huge student loan, it doesn't affect your credit score because student loan debt is not the same as credit card debt. It doesn't negatively affect your credit score. So when you hear these, when you hear this, it almost makes you think that maybe you shouldn't pay off your student loan, or that it might be a good idea not to. Being someone who's paid off their student loans, you're kind of ahead, even if in terms of, money in of itself, you might feel like you're behind, which in actual case, you should never compare yourself to anybody. But you can supercharge your next phase of your financial journey because you already know what it's like to put hundreds and hundreds of pounds or thousands of pounds towards a financial goal. And if you then make a plan and then you stick to it and you see it through, what I love about personal finance and being in this space is that I realized that pretty much any plan that I created, which it's not even my words, it's the words in this card. The question was creating a plan on paying off student finance. Whichever plan you put into paper, you'll find that once you get going, the timeline just shrinks. Like, what you think you can do in a year, you end up doing in 6 months, and that can be hugely motivating. And, of course, by all means, go and do the maths and see what it says. But one thing is for sure, the way that it will work, if you leave it to be, is that after you earn over a certain amount of money, a portion of that money, I think the first percentage is 9%. So it's obviously not 9% of your whole salary. They tell you it's going to be 9% above a certain threshold. You're going to be paying towards your student loan, but don't worry, that will just keep carrying on until you finish working. And then what you'll be left with will just be written off. Now, there is a word for this, and I wonder if you realize like what it is that I'm describing, and that word is a tax. So in fact, in regular speech, it is referred to as a graduate tax. Now, if there's one thing anybody would want to avoid is another type of tax. And what I find that is incredibly counterintuitive is the thought that this tax, the people who have to bear this tax are those that won't be earning enough anyway to pay it off. Kind of feels like a tax on those with lower incomes, which in any progressive type of society, you wouldn't want to increase the tax burden on those that are less likely to afford it. Like, that doesn't sound like a good plan to have. And so that is how it's been structured, unfortunately. But if you speak to, I'm sure if we speak to to countries where education is really super expensive, and people might not have, like, let's say, government assisted programs to pay for that education. The concept of not paying off the student loans is just not an option. And I feel like that is what unfortunately would hold back people in the UK, especially, using these incredibly clever arguments that people have come up with to convince us and lull us into thinking that student loans should just be left alone and we should just bear this graduate tax. Now, creating a plan for it, and we can talk about this more, all starts off with your budget. And like my absolute favorite concept, and I'm sure I have many of these, but one is the idea that you don't need a reason to save. You really don't. If you start to think about a certain level of saving towards either a future goal or towards paying, and a future goal includes paying off debt, you want to dedicate at least 20% of your take-home pay towards that. So when I say this, we have to take a step back and actually look at what our budget allows us to do. And so even before saying to anyone, yes, you should be paying off more towards your student loans, that very well might be the case, but it always gets down to making a plan. And the building blocks of making a plan when it comes to your personal finance is always your budget. And your budget is, you should never think of it in terms of like actual dollar amounts or pound amounts. You should always think of it as a percentage of a whole. So as a percentage, and ask yourself, what does a sustainable budget look like? What does living within your means look like? Great. Am I there? Yes. Amazing. That means that I'm in a position where 20% of my take-home pay can go towards a goal such as paying off your student debt. Now, what allows you to stick to your budget every month, and by stick, I mean making a plan in advance and following through with it. Budgets are not backward-looking, they're entirely forward-looking. A plan that we make already having the money and deciding how it is that we're going to spend it in the near future, meaning the next month. So the way we do that is by having a buffer in advance of our budget called an emergency fund. So that is 3 to 6 months of expenses. I like to say just call it 3 to 6 months of 50% of your take-home pay, because in a sustainable budget, in someone who's living within their means, 50% of your take-home pay ideally should be what it takes you to just live. And so having that in advance of putting money towards a bigger goal, like investing or saving to pay off your student loan, allows you to do that and always moving forwards. It kind of increases your risk tolerance and increases what in economics we call margin of safety. Now, the larger your margin of safety, the more confident you can be to keep going with what goal it was that you're moving towards. So going back to the question, which was creating a plan on paying off your student finance, I would first of all check whether I'm currently living within my means, whether, I'm not paying too much on travel, or I'm not paying too much on just keeping the lights on in the house. And really just depends what it is that you contribute to in your budget and what your living expenses are like. But first checking where is it that your salary is going every month. And then asking yourself, do I have an emergency fund? Or do I have a pot of savings which I can now label my emergency fund and calculate what 50% of 3 to 6 months of your take-home pay looks like? And put that aside. And then look at what you have left. You might find that you have a certain amount that you can just throw at your student loan, which is great. And then moving forwards, you would just say to yourself whether I can put away 20%. And then as you budget more and more, you might ask, that's when it kind of kicks in and you're like, you know what? I think I can reduce... I can negotiate this bill that gives me 20 extra pounds a month. And then you were like, perfect. That's 20 pounds liberated from the budget. That is like whatever percentage of my take-home pay. I can add that towards my student debt. And therefore, I'm not just saving 20% towards it. I'm now saving a little bit more. And that's when you play around with your budget, with the percentage of money that you allocate every month, so that you can get the ball rolling and contribute towards your student loans. The reality is that we have to be confident to believe in our future, believe that it's not entirely in our hands, but we can work towards it, to never be discouraged, and to go forwards. Now, having any type of financial goal is great, but remember when I started and I said you don't need a reason to save? You really don't. And the reason I say this is because it's the difference between somebody who exercises every day and then someone might turn to them and say, are you training for a marathon? Like, why are you running every day? It's like, no, I'm just running every day. And I feel like that is probably the best analogy to use, because sure, yes, you might be running every day because you are training for a marathon. Great. But you also wouldn't recommend to someone, don't run at all because you're not training for a marathon. You don't have a reason to run. It can just be because you want to lead a healthy, balanced lifestyle. And part of a healthy, balanced budget is putting money aside towards the future. And if we think about the food pyramid or the rules like taking 10,000 steps a day, any kind of rule of thumb, which in economics is called a heuristic, any type of heuristic that tells you it's probably easier to stick to it if it is a healthy one. And a good one is the way that we structure budgets, which the common one is 50-30-20, where the 20% is assigned to your future. And so if you think about the plan and where does student finance come into it, putting 20%, working through your budget to see if 20% of it can go towards your student loans is an excellent place to start. Having done a budget, having gotten to 3 to 6 months of your emergency fund, and then you're off to the races, inshallah. And know that you've got plenty of other financial goals and many other things to look forward to, and know that everything it is that you're doing, you're not really doing for yourself. So this has hopefully been an exciting first episode. Thanks so much for joining me. Do let me know if you have any thoughts, any comments. You're welcome to leave them below, or reach me at Nisa Invest on Instagram. That will be our new platform where we can together learn to do all things to do with our money, whether that is earning it, investing it, spending it, giving it in a way that is aligned to our values as Muslims, and have great faith in what our future holds, but also a lot of agency in knowing what to do with our present to make the most of it, inshallah. Thanks so much for listening. I've been Fahan Ibrahim Hashi. You're listening to the Nisa Invest Tea Talk podcast. I'll see you next Jummah. Bye for now.